Okay, good evening. Welcome everybody to this public lecture organized by the Department of Mathematics here at the London School of Economics. Just a couple of kind of household announcements. Please, can you put your mobiles on silent or switch them off so we're not interrupted? This meeting will be recorded. Once we come to the question and answer session, we probably will not use that when we kind of finish the recording or viewing later. So don't hesitate to speak up during that bit. We'll kind of leave that off the recording. And talking about the question and answer session, today's speaker preferred not to kind of get any interruption during the presentation. And there will be plenty of time and chances and possibilities to ask questions. We aim to finish by 8 o'clock. Of course, it depends a lot if you have lots of questions, but that's where we're going. So it's my great pleasure. Oh, by the way, my name is Jan van den Heuvel. I'm the head of the department. Should have started with that. It's my great pleasure to introduce this evening's speaker, Dr. Eugenia Cheng. So Dr. Cheng is a mathematician in residence in the School of the Arts Institute in Chicago. Yeah, we're more used to having kind of artists in residence in STEM areas than the other way around, so really wonderful to have it the other way around. Dr. Cheng has a PhD from Cambridge. Since then has held positions in several places: Sheffield, Cambridge, Chicago, Leeds, and is an honorary visiting fellow of at City University. She's a proper mathematician. She does research, she teaches. And in spite of that all, and publishing in her specialism, her research specialism, also a prolific writer of books that go beyond mathematical research specialism. Books that explain mathematics by using concepts such as baking pies, and the other way around, trying to help us in general to understand the world by using mathematics. And even besides all of that, she's also definitely a professional level musician, pianist, and I think singer as well. Mostly pianist. So we're really very proud to have her here this evening. And today she's going to talk about her experiences and a talk which is titled X+Y, a Mathematician's Manifesto for Rethinking in general.
Thank you very much. Well, thanks for coming, everyone. And I'd also like to thank Joe Faulkner for inviting me and for making all the logistical arrangements for this talk. And also welcome to everyone who's joining this session online. Hello out there. I apologize that the projector is blocking the top right-hand side of this screen, but I hope you can fill it in from the top right-hand side of that screen. I am going to talk about gender. And I'm going to talk about my experience of being a female person working in the very, very male-dominated field of mathematics. I've been asked about this for my whole career because there are so few women in mathematics. And when I was younger, I just didn't want to talk about it because I didn't want to draw attention to myself as a woman in mathematics. But now that I have reached a certain point of stability and security in my career, I feel that it is my responsibility to stick my neck out and talk about these things, especially on behalf of people who maybe don't have that security and don't have the voice in the world that I have. It's a bit scary, sometimes people get angry, but I think that's one of the reasons that we have to talk about these things, so that we're making sure we're not being silenced by the people who are angry at us for raising questions. So I'm going to talk about this from a point of view of both my personal experience as a woman in mathematics, but also as a mathematician, using the tools that I know best, which are the tools of abstract mathematics, and trying to use those tools to shine light and shed some light on not only why we've got to the place we have with this huge gender imbalance, as well as other imbalances in mathematics, but also what we could do about it, rather than just sitting around lamenting, what we could do to escape what I believe is a one-dimensional trap that we're thinking about when we consider gender issues in mathematics. So I will start by telling you a little bit more about my own background as a mathematician and what I've learned from teaching art students, because I now teach art students at the School of the Art Institute in Chicago. Then I'll explain what I mean by the one-dimensional trap that I think we're stuck in. And I will introduce a new dimension. And this is what I do as a mathematician. I'm a higher dimensional category theorist. And what we do is we add dimensions to things and claim that this gives us more insight into what's going on. So I will do that. And this is a theory that I have come up with that has really helped me think more clearly. And that is, for me, what pure mathematics is about. It's not about calculating answers to things. It's not about numbers. It's not about solving problems. It's about finding slight shifts of point of view to help us think more clearly about situations and possibly to think more clearly about a whole wide array of situations at the same time. To me, that's what the discipline of abstract mathematics is. So I'll finish by saying how I think that this new dimension can help us to think more clearly and do something about issues of inclusivity, not just in mathematics, but in the whole of education and perhaps the entire world. So yes, I am a little bit ambitious about my aims, but I do believe that we can use this new point of view to help us in many different ways. Bye. So a bit more about my background. You already heard a little bit about it. Previously, I was kind of a normal maths professor, although probably my friends will say that there's nothing particularly normal about me, but I was a normal maths professor. I had a normal maths career doing the normal things you have to do to become a mathematician, and I taught normal maths students in normal maths universities. And so they were all students who had done very well in maths at school, because otherwise you don't go to university and do maths typically. And they all intended to go into mathsy careers, or in either in maths or in maths-related fields, or in fields that were going to use maths heavily. And it was very male-dominated. And the last really maths class I taught was at the University of Chicago. It was an honors calculus class, and it was less than 30% female students. And then I moved, for various reasons that I'll talk about, and I moved to teach at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago, which is a very elite art school, but it's an art school. And so most of the people there, they're all doing some kind of art. It's liberal arts, so they learn some of everything, but they're all focusing on art, photography, fashion, design, maybe visual communication, perhaps architecture, maybe film, animation, that kind of thing, but it's all those kinds of fields. And it's mostly students who did not do well in school maths, and they will not go into maths careers, and it's very female dominated. Typically my classes have more than 90% non-male people. I usually have more trans students than cis white male students. Still, I realized that the cis white male students, despite being in an extreme minority, managed to dominate every classroom and every conversation, unless I did something very careful to amplify the voices of the other people. So I started really thinking about this. I had previously not wanted to try and come up with some kind of, well, I didn't want to talk to anyone about it because I didn't want to draw attention to myself. And in fact, for the whole early part of my career, I made sure to hide all signs of femininity because I didn't want to give people a chance to stereotype me and say that I wasn't good enough because I was a woman. And then once I got my permanent job at the University of Sheffield, I decided to try and get in touch with my femininity. And I didn't know how to do that inside a maths department, so I just did it outside the maths department. Then I had this weird split life, and then I tried to bring the two together, and then I discovered that I hated my job. So I left. So it's a slightly longer story than that, but that's basically the essence of it. And then a few years after that, I thought to myself, wait, none of that makes any sense, this story that I'm trying to tell, because I am a female person, and so everything I do is female. So what is this femininity that I'm trying to get in touch with? It makes no sense. And what I realized is that we identify character types with gender in a way that is not only unnecessary, but actively destructive to everybody, not just to female people. It puts pressure on people in all sorts of weird directions that doesn't need to be there. And so I started thinking about what character issues may have put my art students off maths before. It's not just the fact that men are better than maths, and I'll come back to why there is still a persistent idea that there's some biological reason that there should be more men in maths. So I just asked my art students. And as I'm sure you'll agree, where education, when it's best, is not a one-way process of someone spewing information that way. It's a all-directions process. And one of the things I love about teaching art students is that they are very self-aware and they love talking to me about their experience of learning mathematics. And so I talk to them and I can learn what has put them off maths in the past and hopefully, I can learn how we could do things differently and then go and share that with the rest of the world. So they're very serious students, but they did not do well in maths and they got put off it for very similar reasons. These themes come up all the time to do with memorization, especially of times tables. They hate formulae, they had a bad experience of getting things wrong, they believed in a false dichotomy between art and maths, and there was a perceived lack of creativity in mathematics. And these reasons make me really sad because they're essentially the exact same reasons I love maths, just the other way around. Because I love maths because I never had to memorize anything, because I just understood things and then didn't have to memorize anything, unlike in physics, where I felt like I had to memorize stuff, and also in chemistry, not in maths. And so I particularly never understood my times tables. And whenever I say that, some people somewhere get really upset and think that surely you memorize your times tables. But I internalized my times tables by understanding relationships between numbers and visualizing patterns. And I think that's different from rote memorization. Just like the fact that I know my name, but I didn't memorize my name. It would be ridiculous to say I memorized my name, but I know my name. It's true that I didn't get things wrong that much when I was at school in maths, but that's because my mother, who is mathematical, introduced me to mathematical ideas at home, not in a kind of you're going to learn your times tables type way, but just showing me concepts and making it part of life, so that by the time I got to kindergarten, I was already ahead. And if you start ahead in kindergarten, chances are you'll just stay ahead the whole time. And then unfortunately, it looks like it's being passed on biologically, but it's just because there was somebody in my house who talked about maths. It didn't necessarily matter that whether it was passed on genetically or just because somebody was there. So I hope we all know there isn't a clean dichotomy between art and maths, and that there is creativity in maths. It's just so often there is no creativity presented in normal maths classes at school. And unfortunately, many people then get the impression that that's all there is to maths, memorizing times tables, memorizing how to solve certain equations that have no meaning, random formulae that just drop out of the sky like an alien spaceship landing on your head, rather than what I think a formula is, which is an amazing explanation of why something is happening. So when I was at school, I had these awful dance classes. It was part of PE, and the dance class consisted of the teacher picking some really dreadful music, making up her own choreography, and then making the whole class memorize her choreography and doing it all in unison to the dreadful music. Unfortunately, I can still remember the music and some of the choreography because it was drilled into us so much. That had no creativity in it at all, but I somehow managed to continue to believe that dancing in general had creativity. It was just that that dance class didn't. Whereas somehow a lot of people see maths classes at school having no creativity and never get to see that there was any creativity apart from that. And this includes basically all of my art students. And so I thought about how this is related to the gender imbalance. And I started thinking about the one-dimensional trap that I think we're in. If we think that masculinity is in one direction and femininity is in some other direction, then it puts pressure on people in different directions. So the pressures on women in the name of equality are sometimes to become more masculine in order to be successful. Whereas then there's a reaction against it, where some women go, oh, but I like being feminine. And then the pressures on men go the opposite way. So sometimes there's a pressure in the name of equality for men to get in touch with their feminine side. And then there's a reaction against that, where men will go, oh, there's a war on masculinity. And then that gives rise to toxic masculinity, where men are trying to assert what they consider to be their precious masculinity. And so I think all that's kind of rubbish. Let's just point out what gender differences have actually been found in supposedly scientific studies, because there are people who are still trying to prove that there are deep biological differences in gender. There are some big problems with how those experiments are set up in terms of what is counted as the null hypothesis and what's the alternate hypothesis. And so, but then if we look at what has actually been found, so there's this big list of results that have been found in a study that looked at all of these studies, and almost every measure apart from a throwing distance and vertical jumping, men and women were found to be within one standard deviation. So I think I'm maybe talking to a fairly mathematical audience, but just in case, let's remind ourselves that a normal distribution is a bell curve, and that the standard deviation measures how wide the bell curve is. And so here are two bell curves that are one standard deviation apart. So there's a big overlap in the middle, which means there is a difference, but there's a big overlap, which means that if you pick a random person in the middle, you can't tell who they are. And if you pick a random person of some gender, you don't know whether they're going to be in the overlap or not. But more to the point, actually, most measures are within 0.1 of a standard deviation apart. These two bell curves are 0.1 of a standard deviation apart. They're practically indistinguishable. And so here's something kind of hilarious about it, which is that many measures were really close, including maths computation and problem solving. But actually, the girls did better at problem solving. I think it was that way around. And the boys did better at computation. The girls did better at understanding mathematical concepts. But the boys did better at feeling like they were good at maths. In any case, either way around, the difference is absolutely tiny. And the question remains, why are we trying to prove there's a difference? And even if there are some differences, why do we think that it's going to help us to know in advance that there's some teeny possibility that someone's going to be better than someone else? Plus, what is it that we're even studying when we study those differences? So there's a big problem here, because anything that is measurable is just not going to be very relevant to life. So for example, you can measure how fast people run the 100 meters, which is, most of us would agree that the fastest people on earth are always going to be men. They're always going to run the 100 meters faster, and no one gets particularly upset about that. But that's not it's not something that's part of life very much, just sprinting the 100 meters. You could sort of say something like, oh, well, what if you're running for a bus? But you don't usually start on starting blocks and kind of wear running clothes when you're doing that. And whereas recently women have been beating men at ultramarathons. Those are the marathons that take place over several days. They're several hundred miles. And that is a much more complex combination of skills that is very difficult to measure in controlled circumstances, because it's to do with not just sheer strength, but some combination of stamina, planning, self-knowledge, strategy, and how are you ever going to measure that? Similarly, when people try and measure mathematical ability, what is it that you can measure? Well, they measure things like how fast you can multiply numbers together, or how fast you can do your times tables or something. Whereas research mathematics ability is an extremely complex combination of skills that combine things like having some knowledge of the literature, but having an overview, seeing connections between things, creatively coming up with new ways of thinking, being able to manipulate logic from different points of view, having people to talk to and collaborate with people. It's a very complex combination of things that I think will just never be able to be measured in controlled circumstances. Then there's the question of how certain are we that what we're measuring is nature and not nurture? So if the older somebody is, the less certain we can be. So in order to study people and be sure that it was nature, not nurture, they really have to study newborn babies. And they do that. They somehow take newborn babies from their mother and then try and do studies on them. But then there's this other question, which is, what can you even study of a newborn baby? They don't do anything. And so how indicative is that going to be of adult behavior? Not very. But they still do these studies, and they take newborn babies and they show them pictures, basically, and they time how long they look at one picture as opposed to another. And they discovered that the boy babies looked at the picture of the mobile for ever so slightly more 0.1 of a second than they looked at the picture of the doll. And they went, oh, you see, that proves that men are destined to be better math professors. So this one-dimensional trap, where some people are determined to prove something about differences between men and women, it pushes us into a false dichotomy, where we have to ask the question, are gender differences innate or are they learnt? And if we decide that they're innate, then we go, oh, well, women can't be as successful as men, and there's just going to be a gender imbalance forever. Or we decide that they're learnt, and then we go, oh, well, women need to learn to be more like men in that case in order to be successful. So I think all of this is nonsense, and that what we should do instead is think about the actual character types that matter for things and see what we're valuing, and then value the character types that are valuable rather than the ones that aren't valuable. And I think this is one of the big things that we're not doing very well in maths education and in the world in general. So I think we need a new dimension to talk about character types separately from gender, because you may think that the words are describing behavior and you just go, oh, well, it's just that most women behave like this and most men behave like that. But words very quickly become prescriptive, and then they start prescribing behavior. So that if a man behaves in a way that is considered to be masculine, then that sounds appropriate. And if a woman behaves in a way that's considered to be feminine, then that's appropriate. But if a man does something that's feminine, then that sounds inappropriate or anomalous. And then if a woman does something that sounds masculine, then that can sound anomalous. And so then it often happens that at role model events and things for women in STEM or whatever, for careers, women get told, oh, well, you need to have more self-confidence and you need to be more ambitious and you need to speak up more. But then when we do those things, we get told that we're aggressive or that we're angry or something. And so you can't win either way. So I think that we can benefit from having a new dimension to think about these things, to separate out the gender dimension from the character dimension. And so I invented these words, ingressive and congressive, to describe character types. So ingressive, etymologically, is to signify going into things, and congressive is to signify bringing things together. And the first thing that I need to stress is that I'm not trying to just replace one dichotomy with another. I'm not claiming that this is a straightforward dichotomy, and I'm definitely not claiming it's biological at all. It's just a way of describing things, and I think it's more of a two-dimensional situation where you can be a bit of one and a bit of another, some of lots, you can change across your life. Importantly, you can learn to be different. You can be different in different situations. And I think that I like this red and blue thing, so you can see that you can be very red up there, you can be very blue down here, you can be not very much of either, or you can be loads of both. It kind of blends into purple in the middle. And I think that my journey through life was like this. What I was trying to say all along was that I learned how to be as ingressive as possible, because that's how I felt I needed to be to succeed in academia. And then it got to a point where I realized that I didn't like myself like that. And so I left and I started trying to unlearn all of that ingressive behavior and build myself a new portfolio career where I don't have to be ingressive and where I can be congressive and meet congressive people. And it's taking a while because the ingressive behavior is so deeply learnt and it's so deeply conditioned by society. And what I think is that society at large, and especially mathematics and academia, have been rewarding ingressive behavior for ages, even though congressive behavior is better for us. And so we're rewarding the wrong things and putting pressure on everybody to become as ingressive as possible. So I should say some more about what I mean by these things, and stress again that I'm not trying to classify people. I'm not going to produce a questionnaire where you answer a load of questions and then you go, oh, your congressive, ingressive score is this. So I consider ingressive behavior to be focusing on oneself, imposing on people. It's about independence and individualism, which is very highly valued in capitalist societies. It's about competition and being adversarial and being selective or single track. A lot of setting up of zero-sum games that don't need to be zero-sum games. Whereas I think congressive behavior is about focusing on society and community, taking other people into account, very radical concept, and interdependence rather than connectedness, the recognition that we're all connected really, which some of us, it turns out, noticed this during the pandemic, and some other people apparently didn't notice this during the pandemic, or willfully didn't want to notice it. And it's about being circumspect and taking many things into account rather than being selective or single-track minded. And so in one sense, we realize and we recognize that we're all part of a community. And so, for example, that there is really no such thing as independence, because you can't be independent unless you're literally living on a kind of desert island by yourself, disconnected from everyone. And so there's, for example, no concept of a self-made millionaire. I hate the concept of a self-made millionaire. Nobody's a self-made millionaire, unless you were just sitting on a desert island all by yourself, in which case I don't know how you would have made millions. Everyone who's made millions has done it as part of the world and society, and has somehow made use of what society has been giving them. So please note that I'm not advocating gender blindness. I'm not saying we should just think about this instead of gender, because again, it's a two-dimensional situation. There are both things. So if we completely only address issues of character and not issues of gender, that would be gender blindness. And I think that that would be, well, it would be one-dimensional. However, if we only address issues of gender and not issues of character, then we risk creating situations where we have diversity but not inclusion. And so that's what happens where you have quotas for women so that you get more women into things, but then you don't think at all about the environment and whether that makes a conducive environment in which for them to work. And then you sort of set them up for failure. You also end up with accusations of reverse sexism and people getting angry because they think that you're doing reverse sexism. And then often, because the women end up miserable, like I did in my job in Sheffield, then you give everyone a chance to go, see, they weren't good enough anyway. And so this is not a productive strategy, I think. So also, obviously, I think that if we do neither thing, then we'll be maintaining the status quo. So I think that we need to do both. And importantly, I'm not saying this is the most important issue. We must address all forms of bias and exclusion along all lines. But I think that trying to become more congressive in everything we do will help all of those things. And without us needing to specifically make quotas or just increase numbers arbitrarily. However, we still need to see all those previous biases, because while there is still direct gender bias and direct racial bias and all sorts of other direct bias going on, we have to see it in order to be able to correct for it. And so that's why we should not be blind to it. At some point in utopia, wonderful, then once no bias is happening anymore, then we don't maybe need to see it anymore. So here are some ways in which I think that this helps us. So this is my dream train carriage design. And I love dreaming things up that aren't necessarily in any way realistic or doable, but I think it can sometimes help us focus on what we're trying to do. And this is what pure maths does all the time. We dream up structures as long as they can work in our imagination. It doesn't matter whether they have any physical manifestation or not. And then sometimes they can end up helping us think about the physical world around us, even though that structure only existed in our head. So my dream train carriage structure is all about the fact that, you know, when you get on the tube, everyone crowds around the door because they want to get on first, which just makes it slower for everyone else to get off the train first. And then they pile in and they refuse to move down the carriage, so they just all hang around by the door. And this is such a perennial problem that even, I love reading Agatha Christie. You know, there's an Agatha Christie where Poirot complains about that. This has been going on for a really long time. And so in my dream design, you don't try and force people to move down the carriage. You just make it so that there's no benefit to them crowding around the door. Because if you have the doors offset like this, so that the indoor is on one side and the outdoor is on the other side, a bit further down the carriage, then there's just no reason for anyone to hang around here. They'll move down so that they're nearer the exit door. So this is what I mean by a structure that just doesn't reward ingressive behavior anymore. And the really annoying thing about people crowding around the doors is it makes it worse for everyone. The whole thing slows down because they don't let people off. I admit, I find it slightly amusing when there are sometimes lifts at tube stations and some people don't realize that the exit's going to be on the other side. And so they hang around this end, and then the people who actually know actually walk down the lift and exit first on the other side. So I've been trying to think up things like this. So obviously if we tried to we couldn't just redesign the entire tube like this with doors on both sides and make all the trains different, because that would be ridiculously expensive. But I tried to think of things like that for structures that I do have some control over. And so I also think about how to deal with ingressive people. So you might think, well, this is all very well, but while the world is still ingressive and while everybody has learned all this ingressive behavior, how can we possibly become congressive? And this is why I left my job in Sheffield, because I couldn't figure out how to do it. But now that I've got this terminology and this way of thinking, it's possible that I would have been able to do something differently rather than just quit. And so I used to think that when there's incoming ingressive energy coming at me, I used to think there were only two options. Either to be ingressive right back, which escalates the situation. So that's where you think up some really, really kind of pithy response that sets it, and then then they get angry with you and everyone gets angry. It doesn't really help anything. But I thought that the only other option was to be passive and just let it happen, which is not escalating the situation, but it is just enabling ingressive energy to circulate around. And now I've realized that there is a third way, which is the congressive way, which is to just neutralize it if you can. And so I'm reminded, I'm not an expert, but I'm reminded of the Japanese martial art Aikido, where when there's incoming aggression, you neutralize it into the floor, and so you don't just meet it with aggression. And so I now try to think of that instead. So if something is coming at me that's aggressive, rather than trying to fight it or let it happen, try and neutralize it or just observe that something is happening. And often when I think of a way of doing it, I realized that the other person didn't really want to be ingressive either, and that actually most people don't want to be. It's just that they think that everyone else is going to be, and so they have to be ingressive and be ready for it. And sometimes it takes practice. Sometimes I can't do it in the moment because you have to slow down, and because I've had so many, a whole lifetime of training and coming up with an ingressive response immediately, and I did get quite good at it. So sometimes it's an ongoing experiment. I try, if it doesn't work, I go home and try and think about what better responses there could have been to deal with that situation. And sometimes it's just, you might think that ingressive is just another word for rude. But the thing is that because these terms are abstract, one of the benefits of abstract mathematics is that you can apply it very widely in many different situations at many different levels. And this is one of the things that is a big insight from my field of research, which is category theory. That the people who invented category theory came up with a way of thinking about mathematical structures that works at really different levels. So you can really zoom in and look at individual things, but you can also zoom out and look at giant interactions between whole fields. And so the abstract nature of ingressive and congressive stuff, I think, means that we can think about it in terms of individual interactions between people, but we can also think about it in terms of how we build environments in our classroom, how we set up our classroom environments, how we set up the education system, how we set up the whole process of getting jobs and applying for jobs and applying for promotion. I mean, the election system, the entire political system. But we can also zoom in and think about individual mathematical activities, how we present individual pieces of mathematics, how we do assessment. And so all the time I'm thinking about how I can present maths more congressively. Is that my next slide? Yes, it is. So I've been thinking, so this is how I started thinking about this, and I love teaching art students, and my teaching is now completely unrecognizable from how I first started teaching. The first lecture course I gave was Part 3 Category Theory in Cambridge, and I lectured exactly the way that I had seen everyone else lecture, which is I stood at a blackboard and I wrote on it while people frantically wrote down everything I wrote on the blackboard. And I did try to explain the concepts as well, but I still just filled tons of blackboards and they frantically wrote it down. And I eventually moved so far away from that because I'm trying to present maths congressively. So I think that ingressive maths is mostly what's done definitely at school and probably in undergraduate degrees as well. So it's about outcomes and facts and rules, solving problems, calculating answers, traditional lecturing where someone stands at the front, and I know I'm doing this now, but we're short of time, and right and wrong answers. And then all of the outreach that, well, not all, but so much maths outreach that gets done for school students is through competitions. And of course, we assess people by exams. And I have not yet ever met a research mathematician who thinks that exams are a good way of finding out if someone will be good at research. And yet, we still assess people through exams to select them to go into research. And I think that this is symptomatic of what we're doing in society, which is that we're filtering people using ingressive filters, even though congressive behavior is better for society. And that if we try to build congressive structures and find congressive people, then we'll do better things for society, in fact. So I've been thinking about how to present maths more congressively. And it's really helped me to have this terminology, because otherwise you're stuck saying things like, oh, how can I present maths so it will appeal more to girls? Which sounds really stupid, and it is really stupid. And that's how you get things like pink Lego, and you get Barbie doll mathematicians. And I saw one egregious outreach thing from a science museum where there was this whole list of fantastic science activities, and then there was a science activity for girls, and it was use chemistry to make your own makeup kit. I haven't finished rolling my eyes yet. So I try to present maths the way I think it really is at a research level. So this isn't, so this is the point. I'm not fabricating this in order to get more girls in. I'm just saying, we've presented maths wrong. That's not how maths is. Maths is like this. It's about processes. It's about investigation and discovery. It's about building structures. It's not just about getting answers. It's about uncovering relationships between things. Yes, I'm a category theorist, and if you know anything about category theory, it's all about relationships and not answers. So that is my particular point of view on maths. But that's also why I was drawn to category theory. I love project-based learning rather than traditional lecturing. And I do activities with my students that are what's called low floor, high ceiling. So there's a very low barrier to entry for everybody, but there's basically no limit to what everybody can learn from that situation. So it's not a race to the finish. So much of school maths is about who can do it first, who can do it fastest. And if you do it fastest, you get celebrated for being brilliant at maths. And if you do it slowly, then you feel you're not as good as everyone else, so maybe you go into something else. But research maths is very slow. Research maths, I mean, I know that there are other scientific disciplines where people race each other to do something first and often fake their results or get them wrong in order because they're so desperate to do it first. But in my field, we don't really race each other to do things first because we know things happen slowly and that if you do it slowly, it's better. And if someone else is working on the same thing, you just collaborate or you just leave them to it. So I also, one of the examples of a low floor, high ceiling activity I do with my students is we look at the Platonic solids, but I don't tell them what the Platonic solids are. I just talk about symmetry, and then we just explore symmetry. So I give them card and scissors and tape. We cut shapes out, we stick shapes together, we investigate what shapes we can make using triangles and squares and pentagons, and build things with more and less symmetry. So some of them build the Platonic solids, and some of them build things that are close to the Platonic solids, but not quite, and some of them build a dinosaur. And they're art students. And if they build a dinosaur, though, so we come back together after a while and we share everyone, so between us, we will have all the Platonic solids, various other shapes, and a dinosaur. And what you learn if you try and build a dinosaur out of polygons is that pentagons are a really terrible shape for trying to build a dinosaur. But triangles are great. You can use triangles to build practically anything. And then I get to talk about triangulation and the fact that mathematics uses triangulation as a technique to study complicated surfaces. And then we talk about how you would do that in higher dimensions. So then we talk about higher dimensional generalizations of triangles. And then we get to talk about higher dimensional simplices, which I didn't study. I didn't even come across them until I was a grad student. And these are art students who often they can't do their times tables. They can't multiply one-digit numbers together. They certainly can't factorize two-digit numbers. They get really stuck and they get confused and they also hate numbers. But now we're talking about higher dimensional simplices and we can talk about classification of surfaces and manifolds. And it's true that we don't do it rigorously and they're not going to become research mathematicians, but they get to see these beautiful things that they were kept out of because they couldn't answer all their questions fast enough and they couldn't get the right answers on the things that were deemed right and wrong. And as a result, the only thing they learnt in the whole of their maths education was to hate maths. And if all that we're teaching people is to hate maths, then we're doing worse than nothing because we're doing negative. And that we would do better if we just didn't teach anything at all, because that would be zero. So here is one of my favorite relationships to uncover with my students, which is the relationship between a bagel and a slinky. And it's not useful. It doesn't answer any questions or solve any problems. It's really satisfying. And it's something from topology, because what it's really saying is that if you take the product of a circle and a circle, you get a torus, which is the surface of a bagel. But what I've done is I've inserted a bagel into a slinky. And they love that. And they always, my art students always say that if they had been shown this kind of maths in school, instead of this kind where they had to keep getting the right answers and then they got told off, they would not have been put off maths. And one student said at the end of the semester, I asked them to write about their experience of the class and how they've changed their view of maths across the semester. And she said, now I find that maths is not just a tool, and that the real reason for learning maths is to practice our thinking. And I thought, yes, this student got it. I'm as cynical as anyone else, and you might say, oh, well, they just said that to please you to get an A. We don't have any grades, and so there's no need to try and please me for anything. And I do think that we are keeping a lot of people out of this way of thinking by presenting it in such an ingressive way. I would also like to talk about success and how this has helped me rethink what I believe about success. So there are many things that people say about success or what you have to do to be successful. And this happens a lot, especially if you go to any kind of role model events for women. I've done various panel events for women where people at various advanced stages of their careers talk to young people about how to become more successful. And these themes often come up where they say you have to take risks and have self-confidence and be ambitious, get out of your comfort zone, be resilient, have a thick skin, believe in yourself, be competitive. And I don't like any of those things. And I think many people, not just women, but anyone congressive may not like those things. And one of the advantages of this terminology is that you quite often get stuck saying, it's not just men, it's not just women, not just men. We don't need to say that anymore. We can say, well, congressive people don't like doing these things. And this helps me as well when I talk about trends with male and female students. I used to have to say, well, I often get female students in the first term when they've just moved from school to university. I often get female students crying in my office saying, I don't think I'm good enough, everyone is better than me, I shouldn't be here. Whereas then the boys would think they're really great, never come to office hours or get help, and then get a C in their first midterm, when I still taught in places with midterms, and they'd get really shocked, and then the girls would be, oh wow, I got an A, wow. And so then I have to say, but it's not all boys and it's not all girls. But what it is that congressive people, congressive students, think they're doing badly and come and get help and try and get better because they see all the time the things that they don't think they're doing well. And the ingressive students have so much self-confidence that they think they're great when they're not. And as a result, the congressive students are actually better at mathematics. And I think that congressive people have the potential to be better mathematicians. They just need more nurturing. And so why don't we do the nurturing so that those people can become better mathematicians? It's not even about inclusivity according to gender anymore. It's just about nurturing people who are going to become better mathematicians. So I think that this is ingressive success, and this is what you need to be ingressively successful in an ingressive environment. Whereas there are other ways to do this. Even if you're in an ingressive environment, you don't have to be these things, because I'm not any of those things. Instead of taking risks, you can build a safety net around you, which is what I did. People often say to me, oh wow, you quit a 10-year job, that was a big risk. But it wasn't a big risk, because I didn't just quit overnight, even though I was very tempted multiple times. And I wrote many resignation emails and saved them in my postphone box. I never sent them. I spent 3 years quitting. I gradually built up my freelance career and my writing books and doing public speaking and having a part-time teaching job so that I knew that I could do it before quitting after 3 years. I don't think that you have to have self-confidence. I don't really have self-confidence. Of course, it depends what you mean, but I think of self-confidence as just confidence that arbitrarily comes from inside you. The confidence I have comes from having supporters, and every time I get nervous about something, which I do every single time. I was freaking out this afternoon because I'm about to give a public talk. I get really nervous about it because sometimes people hate me. And then I sit down and I think about all the people who've previously come up to me after talks and thanked me for saying something that helped them. And I think about that and I think, well, even though there are some people who hate me and yell at me, there are some people who were really touched by something I said that helped them, and that's what makes me keep going. I don't just sit there and go, oh, it's great, I'm going to be great because I'm always great. I just try and think about all those people. So every time someone says something grateful to me, I store that, and that's where my confidence comes from. It looks like I'm ambitious because I've written all these books and I do public talks and go on TV and stuff. But I'm not. I just want to help make the world a better place. And that's all I want to do. And the more I can do that, the better. And people say, you have to get out of your comfort zone. You actually don't have to get out of your comfort zone. I never get out of my comfort zone. My comfort zone is there to protect me. And if I step out of my comfort zone, I am likely to be hurt. Whereas what I can do is very deeply understand my comfort zone from the inside and then expand it so that I can do more things than I previously could, but it's always inside my current comfort zone. People say you have to be resilient. Well, I don't like the concept of resilience. I think that it is a lie that is told, especially to women and people of colour, that's basically saying we should put up with bad behaviour from other people. And I don't think we should put up with bad behaviour from other people. It might be easier to have a thick skin and be resilient and let things wash over me. And every time someone yells at me, which they do from time to time, I get hurt and I get upset. And some people say to me, oh, you just have to let it wash over you. But the thing is, I don't want to be that kind of person. I still want to be a sensitive human with feelings. And I still want to care what other people think, because there may be something valid in what they're saying, what they're yelling. And it's like when we get student evaluations, I'm that kind of teacher who fixates on the bad one. That, you know, if there's one bad one out of 100, I will skim over the 99 good ones and think really hard about the bad one, because there may be something in there that I need to deal with. And so yes, it does upset me, but I don't want to become someone who just ignores that. And so instead of believing in yourself, I think it's really important to believe you can improve. And that's what congressive people do. They don't just sit around thinking that they're great. Ingressive mathematicians think they've got the right answer and they stop, and that's all they want to do, and they don't explore any further. They don't examine whether they've really understood. Congressive students and congressive mathematicians permanently feel like there's something that you don't understand. All the research mathematicians I know, but we spend our whole time sitting around going, wow, I don't understand anything really. The people who think they're done have just missed loads of nuance. And so instead of being competitive, I believe in being collaborative. And there's a whole book by Alfie Kohn called No Contest, where he debunks everything that has, at the time up to when he wrote it, everything that anyone has ever said about thinking competition is good. And he said that most of the studies on competition being good start with the basic premise that competition is good. And then guess what? They found that competition is good. So this is my version of success. And I think it's really important to emphasize that, because I think there are a lot of congressive people who may have just resigned themselves to being less successful because they didn't want to be any of those things. But you don't have to be those things. You can be these things. And one important example of that is how people progress through mathematics education and into mathematics careers, because there are so many people who think they're not good enough, so don't even put themselves forward. And I would have been that person. If I hadn't got into my first choice PhD place, I was going to stop. I wouldn't have gone to my second one because I thought, if I don't get into my first choice, then it means I'm not good enough, and so I should go and do something else. Meanwhile, there are ingressive students who get rejected from 35 grad schools and still keep applying because they're so sure that they deserve to be a mathematician. And then, at the end of my PhD, there was no way I would have applied to the University of Chicago for a job, but someone at the University of Chicago told me to. And that was the only reason I did, because he recognized that I was undervaluing myself and that I was better than I thought I was, and that therefore I needed help to go and put myself forward. And he, that's Professor Peter May, has been doing this for years, finding people who undervalue themselves because they're being congressive and making sure that they get put forward, as opposed to the people who put themselves forward believing that they're great when not. And it's the same with writing books. I never put myself forward for a single book. I have written 8 books, I think. I've lost count. I think it's 8. Maybe the 9th is coming out this summer. I didn't put myself forward for a single one of them. It was all because someone came up to me and asked me if I'd write a book. Meanwhile, there are people who think they should be writing maths books, who send I like that audible laugh, who send out proposals, and because I've written some now, I often get sent them by publishers who say, can you have a look at this and see whether it's worthwhile? And it's often by people who don't even have a maths degree, but they think that they should be writing a maths book. Or they're a physician and they think that they know better, that they're a doctor. I'm in England, I can say doctor. They're a doctor and they think that they know how to do maths education better than all the mathematicians do. Or I read one that, can I say this in public? Let's talk about where the recording goes later. I read one that was by a biology PhD student who reckoned that he didn't have a maths degree, and he didn't even have any degree, and he'd never taught anything at all, but he still thought he knew better how to teach maths than everyone else did. And so these are the people, the ingressive people, who put themselves forward. Meanwhile, there's a whole load of congressive people who sit around going, oh, I'm not good enough to do that. Maybe they're better, and that if we find those people, the congressive people who are undervaluing themselves, maybe they'll be better. And so here is my call to action in both maths, first of all, because that's my expertise, and maybe the rest of life as well. Let's teach more congressive maths, and let's teach it more congressively. And I would like to say that abstract maths is not usually thought of as being something that can be accessible widely to people, but I think that it can be very congressive, as I found from teaching it to art students. Well, I knew in advance, really, but I've demonstrated by teaching art students. And I think it's accessible at many levels of education. You don't have to do the usual ingressive maths thing where you have to learn all the lower levels of maths before you're allowed to do abstract maths. You can do it because it doesn't actually depend on times tables or solving quadratic equations or understanding trigonometry. So I think it can happen at all levels. And in life, let's try and nurture more congressive behavior wherever we can. It's hard if you're a student and you're not in control of anything, but anyone who is a teacher or in any position of responsibility over anything, can try and find ways to make those structures more congressive. And let's build more congressive environments at all scales and all levels. And even if you're a student and you don't have control over very much, you can still have control and try and do that in your personal interactions with friends. And you can have I've found that I can have much more happy friendships and productive discussions where we're not arguing against each other all the time, but we're all trying to learn things together. And I've even learned how to be more congressive towards myself. I used to try and get myself to do more things by berating myself when I hadn't done the things I thought I should have done. And now I don't do that anymore. I have a much more congressive approach and I get more things done. Not that the whole of life is about getting more things done all the time, but I've just been able to be more congressive towards myself, and I found that helpful. And I really believe that we can work together to make a more congressive world in maths, in education, and beyond. And I think that this will be better for everyone of all genders. And this is very idealistic of me. And no, we can't change the entire world at once. But if we believe we can't change things, then we can't. So the first thing we have to do is believe that we can. And I am an optimist, and that's why I'm in education, because I believe that we can help the next generation to do things better than we did. And I hope that you agree with that, and that you too believe that we can make a better future for everybody. Thank you very much. So one of the congressive structures I've come up with is how to do congressive question time. Because ingressive question time is where you all have to, you're invited to ask questions and you raise your hands, and then whoever raises their hand first gets to ask the first question. So I don't see why it should be first come, first serve on raising your hand first. Plus, typically those kinds of question times are always dominated by the same kinds of people, often people who just want to pontificate themselves, and it's very difficult to change that balance. I tried once because research has been done showing that if the first question is by a non-male person, then there will be more questions from non-male people. So I tried doing that, and all that happened was that the second question was from a man who was even angrier than he had been before, who just yelled, and they took the microphone away from him. He carried on yelling. He just kept yelling. So now I've come up with congressive question time, where I will just come around the room and talk to you. And anyone who has a question can tell me their question quietly, so that if you're shy about speaking in front of everybody, then you don't have to speak in front of everybody, and we can have a little chat, and then I will come back to the front and we'll somehow, we haven't quite figured out how yet, collate this with questions that are being asked online. So people who are watching online are invited to submit questions anonymously or just to the moderator or something, and they will be moderated. So that's also not just first come, first serve. I find this also very helpful when there are professors and students in the room, because students may feel nervous about asking their question in front of professors. And I just get to talk to more people a little bit. So I'll gather the questions and then come back to the front and address the questions and the online questions as well. So the main thing that's difficult is for me to write down the questions and then read my own handwriting. So anyway, please talk among yourselves and I'll come and chat.
So for those people online, please type your questions.
So you can think of very high-dimensional spaces, it makes life a lot easier.
Okay, thanks very much, everyone. Some really interesting questions, and I've only got a little bit of time to address them, so I'll try to address everything. The first one I'll address was from various people asking me if I have come up with a congressive maths curriculum, is it shareable? And I wish I had, and I wish I could just change the entire maths curriculum of the world all at once to make it more congressive. But I'm afraid all I've done is develop my own congressive maths classes. And someone asked if a congressive maths curriculum should have more women teaching it or developing it to make it more inclusive. But I think that just making it more congressive is the most important thing to start with. And that includes things like, gosh, can I borrow your copy of my book? I've got the diagram in it. It's probably to the joy of abstraction. So it's probably, thank you.
It's a good book.
It's probably, thanks. Small to see exactly, but there's this hurdles model of maths education, where you have to jump over this hurdle before you're allowed over that hurdle, before you're allowed over that hurdle. That's very ingressive, and it's all about filtering people out. It's saying, okay, who didn't jump over that one? Okay, you don't get to jump over the next one. And maybe it's a high jump model. And I was really bad at the actual high jump at school. I never got over any high jump, so I never got allowed to jump over any high one. But a congressive maths is an interconnected network. Okay, this is way too small, but I just felt like holding it up. It's an interconnected network of things, and so it shouldn't be necessary to pass one thing before going into the next thing. So there's actually no reason to need to pass trigonometry before you study category theory, for example. It has nothing to do with it. And so a more congressive model has less prerequisite, and it's less cumulative, so that everything is a new thought, because most of maths is new thoughts and can be studied by itself, and then everyone can take their own path of understanding. So I was like that. I didn't really understand any of my entire undergraduate degree until I'd done category theory the year later, and I was like, oh, that's what all of those undergraduate courses were about. If only I had done that before. And I'm also the kind of person who understands abstraction before examples. And the typical thing to say is you have to do the examples first. But it turns out all my art students understand the abstraction first before the examples either. And they're the ones who've been put off math. So there's this weird thing where actually maybe some of them think more like me than some of the people who went into maths. And there was a question about the history of maths, and I'm not a historian of maths. There are many things I'm not. We're all not a lot of things. But I haven't looked at a lot of history of maths, but yes, the point was that the Cambridge degree is supposed to be all about thinking, but then you have this ludicrous tripos exam system where you then have to spew out as much knowledge as possible all in a short space of time. Yeah, it doesn't really make any sense. I think everyone's just very attached to it, especially because the people who got through it and were successful, sometimes people who get through a system are successful have so much self-esteem from having got through it, they need to believe that that's a good system, because otherwise where will their self-esteem go? Okay, so let's see, where did today's notes begin? Someone asked whether I think that thinking about congressive things could have consequences into deeper issues of social structures. And I think yes. And I get nervous about speaking outside my own expertise, so I try to focus it on maths first of all. But I do think, and it's helped me to understand, and there have been so many things during the pandemic that have been like that, where you realize that some people think that we're a community and that realize that everything you do affects other people, and some people think everyone's an individual and that we should all have the right to decide on our own things for ourselves, and so whether you get a vaccine is only your own decision, and not having any awareness that it affects any other people as well. And relatedly, someone asked about the idea of rationality as being about maximizing revenue and whether that gets in the way of mathematics or something. And I think that the thing about maximizing revenue is that there are some things where you can only maximize your own revenue by taking away from other people. And that's a zero-sum game, and that's making everything ingressive. And one of Alfie Kohn's points in his book, No Contest, is that we fabricate zero-sum games in a lot of places where there don't need to be zero-sum games. And education is particularly something that doesn't need to be a zero-sum game, because when we're trying what we're trying to do in education is get more knowledge and understanding. And you don't have to take knowledge away from somebody else to get more knowledge. You don't get more understanding by taking understanding away from someone else. It's actually the opposite. You get more understanding by giving more understanding to someone else. We all learn, if we're teaching well, we learn so much more by teaching than I ever did by studying. And so I think the two things I can think of that are self-replicating rather than zero-sum games are understanding, where you get more of it by giving it to other people, and also love, which I think you get more of by giving more of it. So then there's someone said, is congressive maths, will that make a different kind of maths? So my research field, category theory, I think that it is very congressive maths, because it is really about finding structures and similarities between things, and it's about characterizing everything by its relationship to everything else, rather than its intrinsic characteristics out of context. It also is much less competitive than other fields, as far as I know. And so I don't know if those things are related. The kinds of people who are interested in it don't seem to be quite so interested in beating other people out. Someone said that in their field, someone's just stole their ideas. When they tried to be congressive and share their ideas, some of them, the people he shared them with, that just stole them and published them. And that is the kind of environment in which it might seem that you have to be ingressive to survive, because then the answer is not to share your ideas. So in my field, what we do is we share them so publicly that everybody knows it was your idea. And so I'm not quite brave enough to do this, but people just blog continuously their research thought processes, and then everybody knows it was theirs, and you can't steal it. We do present things at conferences before anything is properly published, so that we can start generating ideas and get feedback, and we put everything online before it's published. And so I think that is a sort of congressive, utopian congressive way around, where instead of sharing less, you share more. So someone asked about if there are suggestions for students who want to promote congressive learning rather than waiting for the professors to do it. I mean, you could give them my book. Maybe that's not, I don't know what would happen if you just got the book out of the library and handed it to your professor. Maybe but hopefully you can find supportive professors who you can talk to about it, and then maybe they can talk to the professor about something. So I'm looking at heads of departments. How to unlearn ingressive behavior? Well, the first thing is to be nice to yourself and recognize it's not going to happen overnight. And I still berate myself when I do something that was unnecessarily ingressive. But I go home and try and practice how to do something differently. And I think that I give some specific role-playing type situations at the back of the book, where sometimes it helps me to come up with the ingressive response first, because that's the one I learned how to do, and then try and think of other things I could say, and gradually think of more and more possible responses that I could have given to try and be more congressive about it. Someone said, how did I get the bagel in the slinky? So I used to do it by cutting the bagel open and inserting it. And everyone always got so disappointed when I said that. So finally last summer, I did it by winding it on. And it took about half an hour, and it made my wrists hurt. And it wasn't really any more satisfying to me, but at least now I can say, yeah, I wound it on. And I've still got it, because I'm never taking it off, and I'm never doing it again. It just sort of hardened. How did I become more feminine? Someone said, what did I do when I tried to become more feminine? Well, the first thing was I wore a dress for the first time ever. And actually, a friend and I, some of you may have heard of Emily Reel, who's an extremely brilliant mathematician, category theorist. We phoned each other before a category theory conference, and we made a pact that we would both wear a dress to the conference dinner. And it was a really big deal. No one had ever done that before. So that was one very superficial thing. But I also just tried to show my feelings. Didn't go down very well. Didn't go down very well at all. Someone said, if I had a magic wand that I could wave and change something in all math departments overnight, what would it be? So, because it has to be a magic wand and I have to do it now, I had to think of something quickly, which is a little bit ingressive. And the first thing that popped into my head was to abolish all exams. And all grades with it. So at the School of the Art Institute, there are no grades. The whole university has no grades, and we don't have to have exams. So I always find it very surprising that some professors still choose to have exams. I don't have any exams. I run my course that's just all pass-fail, and I run it like I try to learn from how art school is done. And so I do it by portfolio. So they build a portfolio of things that they've worked on through the semester. And so they don't have to get it right the first time. There's no such thing as right in the kind of thing we do, but they do something, and then I work with them on it, and then they reach a higher level of understanding, and then it's ready to go in their portfolio. And we can do that because our class sizes are capped at 20. And so if you have to teach 500 people at once, that's not so practical. But then there's a question, why are we trying to teach 500 people at once? Someone said, what piano music do I like playing? I love playing Bach. I know that's a bit stereotypical for a mathematician, but I love Bach. But I also love playing for singers, because it's very collaborative, and I run a congressive music event thing in Chicago, a salon, where we don't really practice or rehearse, and we don't really perform. We just share and we drink. And we get so much more out of sharing without having to be fixated on correctness and playing the right notes and showing how brilliant you are.
French suites you play?
Sorry?
French suites?
I prefer the Preludes and Fugues.
Fugues?
The Preludes and Fugues, yes. I love playing the songs of Schubert and
Well
Schumann.
tempered, quite.
Yes. How did I move to the School of the Art Institute? Well, I was trying to leave Sheffield. And I sat down and I thought about all the things I think I'm good at, And then I made a list of all the things, ways in which those things were being made use of in my job, discovered the answer was about 1. And so I tried to think of what I would do in utopia if there were no constraints on anything. What would I do? No constraints on money, visas, jobs. And I decided I would go back to Chicago and make something up as I went along. So I went back to Chicago and I managed to get a 1-year teaching job at the University of Chicago. They were very confused about why I wanted to move. They said, is it because you have a husband and you want to move with him? They said, do you have a 2-body problem? No, I have a 1-body problem. My 1 body doesn't like its job where it is now, and I want to move for me. I'm not doing it for someone else. Anyway, then at the end of that job, this opportunity came up to teach for 1 semester of maternity leave for someone who was teaching maths at the School of the Art Institute. I wasn't really aware of the concept of maternity leave because there just weren't any female maths professors in places I'd been at. It never occurred to me that anyone would need maternity leave in the maths department. Anyway, and someone said, why do art students take maths? It's because it's liberal arts, which means that they have to do some of everything. They have to take 2 science classes, and because it's art school, maths counts as science. And so they often say to me, I ask them why they're taking it, and they often say, oh, well, it looked like the least worst science class description. But now I've been there for a while, because what happened was it was supposed to be 1 semester, and I decided it sounded like my dream job. And so I decided to try and make them like me enough that I could stay forever. So that worked. And now students often say they're taking my class because their friends told them it was a really great class, and I love that. Someone said Rishi Sunak wants everyone to take maths until the age of 18. And some people say they would rather die than take any more maths. And what do I have to say about that? And I say that whatever we're doing, we're typically doing it so badly that doing more of it is just going to make it worse. And that if we did it better, then yeah, we could do it more and everyone would like it. And I think that what we should do, rather than doing more of what's terrible, is fix what we're doing up to the age of 16. Because if we're making people hate it so much that they would rather die than do any more, then clearly something has gone really wrong. Someone asked what I think about streaming by ability in maths classes. And it's a very ingressive thing where you label people as having different abilities and then you teach them differently. And it's tricky, right? Because it's very difficult to teach a wide variety of people maths at the same time if some people want to go really fast to do more. And the thing is that that's a very ingressive mindset that they already have. And someone asked if I know about the maths resilience thing. And yes, because people label themselves as good or bad at maths instead of having a growth mindset where you're supposed to believe that we can all grow and become better and it's not a fixed thing. And that if you stream people, you kind of cement the idea that these people are good at maths and these people are bad at maths and that the people who are bad at maths therefore need to do things separately. The Finnish education system is famously much more congressive. They don't stream, they don't even really have subjects, they don't have homework, they don't have standardized tests, they don't have really class times. It's very much more, and they also have no private school anywhere, at least the last time I read about it, this was true. And then they turned out to just do better at everything, even though they were never aiming to do better. They were not aiming to achieve excellence. They were aiming to achieve equity. And guess what? They achieved excellence by mistake. Without meaning to. Whereas all the other people who were trying to achieve excellence just achieved inequity and less excellence. Somebody asked me whether I thought of Aikido, whether I learned about Aikido and then came up with this. And someone asked me how I came up with these ideas through teaching art students. And both of those questions are related. And I think it's that for me, the discipline of abstract mathematics is about looking around me all the time and having practiced. My brain is very practiced at doing abstractions, at finding connections between things, and at being able to see what is relevant and what isn't relevant in any particular situation. And being reminded of things by other things. So whether it's one piece of music reminding me of another piece of music, a book reminding me of another book, a situation reminding me of something someone said to me that is all part of how my brain has been trained in abstract mathematics. And that's how I came up with all of these things. It was to do with figuring out what is and isn't relevant in a situation, and then drawing on everything that has ever happened to me and finding things that are relevant to think about. And that's one of the reasons I think that abstract mathematics is a valuable thing to teach everyone, rather than the specific useful maths that maybe people think that maybe is Rishi Sunak's idea of what we should teach up to the age of 18, which is things like, I don't know, mortgages and doing your taxes. But if you learn how to do your taxes, we're in England, you don't have to do your taxes. Mortgages, nothing really works like a mortgage. So if you learn how a mortgage works, you haven't really learned anything except how a mortgage works. Plus, the next generation may never be able to get a mortgage. So, and let's see, what else? Someone said, is personal interest enough to get you into mathematics, or do you have to have, is there something about character as well? And I think that when I was an undergraduate, I was very worried after my first year of exams because I had done really badly, not really badly, I had done the worst in the subjects I thought I liked the best, and I had done best in the subjects I didn't like. And so I asked my wonderful director of studies, Paul Glendinning, what I should do about that, because I'd done really well in differential equations and I really hated them. And he said that what I was interested in was more important, because when it gets hard, he said, that's the thing that will see you through. Whereas if you do it because you think you find it easy, that will not get you through. And this turned out to be true when I look at my career compared with some of the people who were much better than me, according to the ingressive filters of maths as an undergraduate. They kept finding it easy, and they kept telling me how easy they found it. They kept making me feel stupid because they found it so much easier than me. But then when it got hard, they couldn't do it anymore, and they didn't want to put in that work. And some of them fell off before their finals in the third year, some of them fell off during their PhD, some of them fell off during their first postdoc. And then, but somehow, because I wasn't doing it because I found it easy, I was doing it because I loved it, was fascinated by it, and was prepared to work hard, and I had enough supportive professors who helped me. And so I think that's what you need. You need to love it, you need to want to put the work in, but you also need to have supportive professors around you. And that's where I'm now staring at the professors in the room to urge you to make sure that you are supportive and find those congressive people who might otherwise fall off, so that we can make a more inclusive, congressive, nurturing maths environment. And someone said, how do we start the revolution? Well, it's important to start with the things that you can do. We can't just immediately change the political system, much as we would like to. We can't change the entire education system at once. But anything you can do differently, start there. And just like when you're doing little epsilon proofs or something, the little epsilons can all build up. And especially if we all work together congressively, we can. This is my idealistic self coming back again. I think we can make big changes by starting with little ones and adding them together. So I hope that you will feel like we can do that together. Thank you very much.